Okay guys, it is a rainy last day of August. Let's grab a cup of tea and talk about some books. Before I get into what I read in August, I just wanted to talk about the little notebook that I bought from One Canoe 2. This is a book-specific journal that you can keep track of all of the books that you're currently reading in. I'm in love with the little cover. It's a nice cloth cover. And then on the inside, it has a place for your name as well as when you started the journal and finished the journal. You have a quote from Stephen King here. Books are uniquely portable magic. And then the next page is your reading list. I'm already pretty impressed with how many books I have on here, even though I've only finished half of them. But there's plenty of space for all of your books. There's 4 pages here. And then the notebook starts with book 1, and you can fill in all of the information as well as your rating, likes or dislikes, quotes and notes, as well as related readings. And then at the end here, you have your borrowed book list. I only have one on here currently. I typically don't lend out books, but since this is with my mom and dad, I figure I can probably track it down if I have to. And then this very last page is your best books, top 10 favorites out of the journal. And then it lets you keep track of how many books you read in what year. So on to the books. Space Struck is the most recent book that I finished in August. It is a book of poems. I have to say I'm not typically a poem person, but there were a few lines that really stood out to me in this book. Most of my experience with poems has either been in high school or the smattering of Rumi poems or Mary Oliver poems that come through my Instagram feed. So this was definitely stepping outside of the box for me in terms of reading. A lot of the poems are very metaphorical, and I'm usually the type of person that you have to tell straightforward what you're thinking. Otherwise, I won't understand what you're talking about. So like I said, this was really tough for me, but I am glad that I tackled this one. It was part of the Life's Library subscription service. I'm thankful that we had the Discord to talk about the different poems. And the thing that really helped me out was the Q&A with Paige Lewis, the author. Paige told us readers not to ask them about what the poems are about, which I thought was a pretty refreshing take on it. They also called us collaborators and that we make the poems better by coming up with different ways to experience them. They also talked about the getting it pressure, which is a problem that people assume that they're supposed to understand what the poems are about, and that because of that pressure, people are turned off by the idea of poetry. So they suggested that we approach poetry like we're not going to like it at all. One other note that I made about this book was that I don't dislike poetry. I know that I don't dislike poetry. I love music, and I generally get a lot out of the lyrics in songs. There are some song lyrics that even make me swoon when I hear them. So I think that I just have to find poetry that I like. I rated this book 3 out of 5 stars just because it was generally hard for me to read and hard for me to understand. Even though it was a shorter book, I had difficulty getting through it, and it took me a lot longer than I expected. Next up is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I absolutely adored this book. It was so stinking cute and steamy. Oh man, it was so steamy, but really good. The way it's written gives you these nice fluffy feels while also providing thoughtful notes about chronic illness and traumatic relationships, both of which I have experienced. So I felt really at home in this book and also kind of seen. I really liked both characters, and I really identified with both characters in terms of their different traumas. And of course, Chloe is just so smart and witty, and Red is vulnerable and cute. Talia really knows how to write a love interest. I also hope that we get to see Gigi and Annie come back. I know Gigi is Chloe's grandmother, so I expect we'll see her in the other sister novels. But Annie is one that I am hopeful will also show up. She was such an interesting character, and I want to learn more about her. Next up is Blonde Roots by Bernardine Evaristo. This is another Life's Library book that I started back in June. I was very behind on this one because I had such a hard time getting into the story. Actually, I take that back. The story was really, really good. When I got to part 2, that is from the perspective of the antagonist, I really had a hard time getting into that character and seeing things from his side. I will say what was really interesting about that section was it was kind of similar to how Heart of Darkness is written. That was a book that I had to read in high school and I hadn't really thought about it since. And then on the Discord, somebody pointed out that there is a chapter in part 2 called Heart of Grayness. And then I pulled out my copy of Heart of Darkness and started to kind of compare and contrast and saw a lot of similarities. This book is a flipped narrative on the slave trade, reimagining the world if slaves had come from Europe rather than Africa. I was kind of struggling to find a way to put into words how well Bernardine reverses things until I read one of the quotes on the cover. It says, "Breathtaking, ingenious, a riotous, bitter course in the arbitrary nature of our cultural values." It is definitely a must read. I just will say that it was difficult for me to get through this in a short amount of time. And that's probably for the better. This was one of those books and during one of those time periods that I really needed to sit down and think about everything. So I rated this book 3 out of 5 just because it was so difficult for me to get through. Also, it was really sad, really depressing, and not as entertaining of a storyline as I would have wanted. Then again, it had to do with slavery, and I think just my gut was having a really difficult time digesting it all. Next on my list is Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I'm so glad that I finished this, even though I had a really difficult time making it through this. There are some great notes on parenting and love, along with feminism and a little bit about race. Even though I didn't 100% enjoy this, I'm probably going to revisit this at some point, maybe when I start having children, because I really liked Glennon's perspective on parenting. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars just because it was so difficult for me to get through. It also kind of made me angry in some parts, and it's not because of what Glennon said, it's just because the subject gets me riled up. Next up is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sainz. This is a really cute, light read that I chose over Axiom's End. If you followed any of my Instagram stories or some of my other videos, I put that one down towards the beginning of the month because it was not my cup of tea for this time period and what's going on in the world. So I looked for something that was really cute and a light, breezy read. And while I described this book that way, it really had some moments of seriousness in it. Of course, I remember being 16 and 17 and everything feeling like it was the end of the world. I was trying to figure out who I was, with who my parents wanted me to be, and that's really how these two main characters are developing, especially Aristotle. I think I identified a little bit more with the parents than I did the main characters, the kids. I think that just kind of speaks to how old I am now, but there were parts of Aries and Dante's story that really felt nostalgic for me and made me wish for those summers that I was spending kind of running around outside and having pool parties with my friends. I gave this book 4 out of 5. It didn't take me very long to finish it. It was fun, it was entertaining, and it had a few elements of seriousness which I really enjoyed. Last up is Lab Girl by Hope Jahren. I really freaking enjoyed this book. It was a huge surprise that I liked it. Like I said before in one of my other videos, I love science. I loved the time that I was in college learning about geology, and I feel like I learned a lot in this book. Now, I'm not a scientist, so some of the phrases went a little bit over my head, but there was enough context there for me to understand, and I think I'm probably going to go back and do a little bit of research so I can learn more about them. Not only was this interesting and educational, it was a beautiful book to read. Hope talks about in the very beginning of the book, her mother introduced her to a lot of the classics, and you can tell that she really has a deep love for literature and prose. Not only that, but the relationship that she describes with her lab partner Bill was the kind of relationship that I think anyone could hope for in friendship. So I rated this book a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed reading it. I loved loved the characters, even though they're not actually characters, they're real people. I love how Hope analyzes everything and makes things a little bit easier for the layman to understand. And of course, I love anything about science. I love learning how the earth ticks, how a lotus seed shell could be 2,000 years old and still sprout. And I'm definitely planning on reading her other book, The Story of More, about climate change. So there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read in August. I knew it was ambitious, and I'm so happy that I accomplished my goal. I'm planning to do my September reads video here in the next few days, and I have to say that that one is going to be even more ambitious than August. I'm not sure if I'm going to get all of those books read, but we'll see. Please make sure you like and subscribe and click the little bell if you want to get notifications for my videos. We'll see you next time, and keep reading.